Well, the Bill, it's an honor to have you the moderator today. I recalled your work going back to the 1970s and how important it's been over the years. It's a privilege also to speak at the center and the college, and I thank you for this invitation. Uh, and it's an honor to be here on Earth Day. I was just watching the news as the International Climate Summit that the president has called was unfolding, and that's really an important event. Um, and thanks to David Worth, who originally invited me to do this. If I seem to lose track a little bit today, it's because I'm looking out of a window which is covered with snow. The whole field out in front of me is white and glaring, and I realize that it can get this way in Vermont in April. I'm also remembering Earth Day 51 years ago. My daughter, 1 year old, and my wife and I were on the mall for that first Earth Day celebration. And at that time, we were working to launch the Natural Resources Defense Council. And the reality is that our hopes were very high. We thought we were going to make a lot of progress very quickly in those days. And the good news is that NRDC and other groups have racked up a ton of victories over the decades. And I shudder to think what the world would be like hadn't they done this. Yet we have to face, at this point, over 50 years in, a deeply troubling paradox. As our environmental groups have gotten bigger and stronger and better funded and more sophisticated, the environment has gone downhill. And not just slightly downhill, but downhill in a major way, to the point that it's a fair thing to say, I think, that we're on the cusp of a ruined planet. Climate change, of course, is coming at us quite hard. And there's a great climate tragedy unfolding today. And around the world and here at home, we're losing biodiversity and forests and fisheries, agricultural soils, all at frightening rates. And freshwater shortages are multiplying. Toxics accumulate in ecosystems and in ourselves. I remember when we worked on the Clean Water Act in 1972, there was a goal set for fishable and swimmable waters all across the United States for the mid-1980s. Well, we are well past that, of course, but the truth is that only about half of the waters of the United States meet the fishable and swimmable standard today. 40% of Americans are exposed sometime during the year and often by dangerous levels of air pollutants. Since 1982, we've lost an area the size of Washington State to development, much of it prime agricultural land and pristine areas. 30% of the plant species in the US and 18% of the animal species are now threatened with extinction. And of course, our behavior on the climate issue and our response to the climate challenge over the decades has got to rank as one of the great derelictions of civic responsibility in the history of the Republic. So something is terribly wrong. We set out with high ambitions, the very highest, and we find ourselves in a tragic situation today where urgent action is required across a broad front. And one might make a similar claim that things are badly wrong on other fronts outside of environment. I won't go into that, but you know the issues very well from the news. So something's terribly wrong. And one thing we can be sure of, but more of the same that we've had for the past few decades, is not going to work. We have living now with the very conditions that we set out in 1970 to prevent. And we truly believed that we could make the system work back then. And indeed, in some respects, it has. And we worked very hard at it in the ensuing decades. But we've now really run a half-century experiment on whether working within the system and trying to make the system work is enough. And we know that now the results of the experiment are in, and we know that we can't simply make this system perform at a level that we need. So here's the most important thing I'll say today, I think. Changing that system change, is now essential because our environmental problems and the climate emergency are deeply rooted in defining features of the current political economy, the current system that we have. Let me repeat that. These problems that we are experiencing today across a broad front of environment and other issues are the results of the political system that we have, the political economic system. And if we want to deal with these problems, I think it follows that, well, we've got to change the system. So what are some features of this current political economy that are warring against effective action across a broad front? Well, there's this unquestioning commitment to economic growth at essentially any cost. There's a measure of that growth, GDP, which ought to be thought of as grossly distorted picture. Powerful corporate interest whose overriding objective is to grow, to earn profit, including profit from avoiding the cost that they create to society. There are markets that systematically fail to recognize these external costs from the corporate sector unless corrected by government. But government that's in turn subservient to the corporations and to the growth imperative and has no deep commitment to real change. A rampant consumerism that we're all maybe sometimes guilty of is spurred endlessly on by sophisticated advertising. And there's social injustice and economic and social deprivations and insecurities that are so vast in society that they paralyze effective action across a broad front of these issues. People are scared and easily frightened by claims that the economy is going to falter, that jobs will be lost, prices are going to go up, etc. And we are still afflicted by a set of dominant cultural values that we know in our hearts are wrong. Materialism, individualism, anthropocentrism, where we think we're unique above the animals and plants and the life of the planet and master them and could do anything we want with them. And now economic activity on the planet is on such a vast scale, and the impacts are so vast that, that we're altering the planet's great biogeochemical cycles and systems. So I submit that we won't be able to go far enough or fast enough to deal with crisis and other issues as long as the systemic priorities we're living with are ramping up GDP, growing corporate profits, increasing the incomes of the already well-to-do, neglecting the half of Americans that are just getting by, paycheck to paycheck, feeding our runaway consumerism, focusing only on the present and not thinking about the long term, and facilitating great bastions of corporate power who now dominate the political system that we try to make progress in. So this complex is the citadel of power we're up against. And it's really what's behind our environmental problems, our social problems. And let history be our guide. It will continue to be the problem unless we change that system. So we've got to drive a deep change in the country until the old failing system that we have now yields to a new system. I think it's clearly time for something different. And the environmentalists have a role to play here. And we need, in effect, a new environmentalism that seeks to change the system. Um, and it's not artificial to extend environmentalism to these issues that I've been talking about. Ask yourself the question, what's an environmental issue? Well, normally people would say, oh, it's air pollution, water pollution, and those are good answers. But what if a big part of the answer to what is an environmental issue are those things that war against environmental progress, those things which affect environmental outcomes, which we're all struggling to work for. And well, if you look at it that way, then certainly the creeping corporatocracy and plutocracy that we have is an environmental issue. The chartering and empowering of corporations to do virtually anything in the name of profit and growth, an environmental issue. The fetish of GDP growth as the ultimate public good and main aim of government, our runaway consumerism, the social insecurity. Half the country's people in the country just getting by paycheck to paycheck. Well, these are the underlying drivers of environmental outcomes. And if we're going to win, we have to make them into environmental issues, which they so clearly are because they do affect the results of environmental efforts dramatically. So we need a new environmentalism that's going to debunk consumerism and commercialism and the lifestyles that they offer, turn away from growth mania and the profit center economics, redefine what society should be striving to grow, challenge corporate dominance and today's main corporate forms and its goals, embrace deep change in the ownership of productive assets and the control of investment decisions, and push against the anthropocentric and contempocentric values that dominate in our culture. I think we've also got to join as environmentalists with those that are seeking to deal with the low-income situation, the vastness of the poverty, economic insecurity, and inequality that's now unraveling America's social fabric. We've got to make common cause with those seeking to reform politics and strengthen our democracy. And we've got to fight the vicious circle of income disparities that further shift political access and influence to the wealthy constituencies and to big government. In terms of political reform, it's an environmental issue to embrace public financing of elections, new anti-corruption ethical restrictions on legislatures, to proclaim the right to vote, to regulate lobbying and the revolving door, to have nonpartisan congressional districting, and other political reforms as a core of the environmental agenda. And above all, maybe we need to reach out as environmentalists beyond our initial circle, so to speak, our current circle, to embrace working families, people of color, marginalized communities, frontline communities, minorities, farmers, unions, women movement, and other communities really who share a similar fate on this planet that we do. So we've got to drive systemic change so deeply that the country emerges down the road with effectively a new system of political economy. And this, in a nutshell, I think is what we should be seeking to build. A new system that routinely, almost automatically produces good results for people and planet and place, and doesn't make progress on these fronts always so terribly difficult, so tremendously uphill, and in many cases, simply impossible. All right, so this idea of a new political economy is too big to swallow whole. It could be simply dismissed for that reason, but that would be an unthinking dismissal at this point in our history. So what I've tried to think about is how do you break this system change down into normal issues, into manageable packets of concern and result and policy. So I have some transitions I want to relate to you. And these transitions describe where we want to go. And in each of these cases, as I'll mention in a moment, there's a lot going on. People are actually doing a lot of these things, and a lot is happening. And it's certainly misguided to say this is all pie in the sky. It's also true that nothing really happens unless it starts with a vision or a dream. And if to the degree that some of these ideas remain vision, and then, well, it's good to have that. And it's good to know that we can start there. The directionality of change is very important. We don't need to know everything that's going to happen down the road, but we do need to move in the right directions. So one is the market transition. We need to move to an economy where the market becomes a secondary force and not a primary one, where the predominant forces of cooperation among parties and planning and regulations that ensure that prices and wages are fair. We need a corporate transition where profit becomes a secondary motivation for enterprises. And business are instead focused primarily on producing good environmental and social results. And indeed, they're required to do so because they exist under government charters which need to specify that and need to be periodically reviewed if they want to continue. So here we're talking about economic democracy, embracing worker ownership, co-ops, community and public ownership, public-private hybrids, and profit, not-for-profit hybrids, a range of new enterprise types that are taking place. We need a growth transition where we focus growth on the things that we really need to grow. We have a set of democratically determined priorities, and we focus investment decisions on those priorities and move away dramatically from this idea that aggregate economic growth as measured by GDP is a good idea. I commend the Biden administration for adopting this policy, a general policy of trying to grow things that need to grow and invest heavily in them. There are other things that need to shrink, and we should be getting out of those areas. So it's a different concept of growth. It's very different from the prevailing one today. Similarly, investment is now overwhelmingly in our society determined by for-profit institutions dedicated to high financial returns. We need a new systems of investment management which are dedicated to public good, to high social and environmental returns, and to democratically determined priorities. So basically, Main Street over Wall Street. A social transition where we really reject the idea that the sky's the limit in terms of incomes, and there's no floor on the bottom in terms of incomes. We need powerful measures to promote social justice, greater fairness and equality in our society. We know how to do this. The tax laws have arranged things for what we have today and other measures. We can fix that. We need a lifestyle transition. So many of these things environmental groups don't talk about today much, but we need to challenge the lifestyles that we have today and recognize that you're not going to meet non-material needs with material things. And so we have to see that our main sources of happiness are other people and companionship. and not a product. And we have to see other species as a communion of subjects, as Thomas Berry describes them, not a community of subjects in which we are an integral part. That's what we need. Runaway enterprises and throw communities we need to replace with vital local communities that prize solidarity, diversity, acceptance, tolerance, and we find the joy and happiness in community and in each other. And of course, the democratic transition, where we have got to put in place first order reforms for our democracy. The list is long, but there are sort of top 10 that I've written about democratic reforms that are needed, some of which I mentioned earlier. So these things are doable. There's a lot going on in each of these directions. We're seeing the proliferation of sustainable communities, solidarity economy initiatives, new food systems, locally owned and managed energy, and a fight for own your own utility. Community development and finance institutions that focus on local needs, sharing and barter networks, local currencies, campaigns to take back your time, move your money, and others that we are familiar with. And we're seeing also the spread of innovative business models. And social and public enterprises for profit, for benefit and not strictly for profit businesses, worker-owned and other cooperatives, local credit unions, public banking like the new California law encourages, and campaigns for fair wages, worker rights, family leave, family policies, racial justice, and more. There's a lot of activity going on in our country which is moving us in the right directions, and we are seeing the unfolding of the future before our eyes. As crises hit, and they will, people will look around and they will ask, well, what's working? And they'll see these initiatives and they can multiply and grow rapidly today. So these patterns clearly aren't dominant today, but I think they're on their way. And taken together, all of these things and the things I've talked about, I think provide instructive, maybe even inspirational models of how things might work in a new political economy that gets beyond the current corporate consumerist capitalism that we have today. So thank you for listening. A lot of the ideas that I have and have had, but even more important, that a lot of other people have had or have been collected in a book that I edited recently called The New Systems Reader, Alternatives to a Failed Economy. And there are 28 essays in there, each envisioning a different political economy down the road from the one that we have today. And often they present good examples from Europe and elsewhere of these things being done today. So I encourage everyone to go out and immediately buy a copy of my book. But seriously, it is there. There's good material there, and there's good material in a lot of other books. A lot of our work and our thinking is on the website of the Next System Project. If you go there, you'll see a wonderful resource for thinking further and acting on these issues. Thank you very much. Phil, back to you.
Thank you, Gus. That was outstanding. really a sweeping vision. We've got some good questions. I'd actually start with one of my own. Ever since I read Sheldon Whitehouse's book, Captured, a year or two ago, where he talks about the power of corporations and how they've managed to get hold of so many of the agencies of government, I've been thinking about how do we actually proceed to do what you just talked about a few minutes ago, which is to rewrite the charters that the government issues to corporations.
Well, it would be, I mean, first it depends on where one enters this picture. If one enters it today, what one finds is a Senate which is unable to act in a serious way because of very small bits of very small numbers of people and very small bits of the population. And I could. I think we've got, just in terms of moving forward, we've got to get beyond that. And if we do, there are lots of things that can be done. In terms of Captured and its thesis, we have, two impressive pieces of legislation right there, ready to go in the Congress, HR 1 and the John Lewis Act, both of which would help immediately with some of the political issues that we face in terms of democracy. But there are a lot of other democratic reforms that could be adopted, and over time, in terms of being captured, we need to think about new public financing of elections, and we need to get beyond the mantra that money is vote, money, and one would like to see over time the separation of corporation and state, in effect, and so I think those would be important initial steps. And then in terms of building a different set of rules for corporations, there is a lot that could be done in a decent legislative environment. One could have, and it's been proposed many times in our history, federal chartering of large corporations. And one could have rules that say that, you've got to provide greater access to workers in terms of ownership and management, as they have in Germany, for example, of corporations. And Bernie Sanders had some really interesting proposals for enhancing the prospects for worker shares in companies. I think we ought to be seeing a process where the federal government, in some form, governments in some form, begin to take leadership shares or big shares in corporations and be sure that the public interest is represented in those corporate boards. And so I think there's really a long list of corporate reforms that could be written and not foreign to many other countries, and have come up often in our national politics.
Thanks. The next question comes from Zig Plater at the Boston College Law School. I think it follows on the one we've just discussed. Zig says, for a sustainable, ecologically sound society, don't we need to eliminate pollution, but don't we also need to eliminate the filibuster and the perverse twists of finance, of campaign finance? So the filibuster, I think, is the core of this one.
Yes, well, this was one of the, thank you, Zig, an old friend, for that
Thank you.
question. This was one of the points I was driving at a moment ago about the threshold issues. Uh, if we I like the legal argument that the filibuster is unconstitutional. And they run something like this, that when wanted to provide a supermajority to get things done in the Congress, they knew how to do so. And they did so for treaties and other things. So when they don't do that, it really is a perversion of the framers' intent to create these requirements of supermajority. Um, so there are immediate reforms that should be palatable to, one would hope, a majority of the Senate. One would be to go back to the days when a filibuster really was a filibuster. And if you wanted to take more time to dramatize your opposition, well, you had to stand there and take it. And this is the so-called talking filibuster, which is, kind of a unnecessary because they all should be talking. I remember, um, Lord mercy, when my senator from South Carolina, Strom Thurmond, who took to the floor and talked forever against the civil rights legislation. Fortunately, he was beaten. But those usually give people a chance to express their opposition, but they fade, and the legislation can go on with closure. And I think there are lots of other ways you could provide for sort of a temporary time, a sort of phase down of what a filibuster or opposition can do. But after a certain period of time, your ability to object is gone. And there were proposals to do that in the Congress not that long ago. So those are, three some points against the filibuster. But I think that think of all the things that could be passed in the Senate today and in the House if there were no filibuster and we required 50 votes, and if we had another vote or two, which we may need for some of these things in the Senate. So we'll get our chance in 2 years for that, and but I think it could be at that point, and maybe before, if people come to their senses, we could see a sea change in national progress.
Thank you. The next question is more technical. It comes from a young woman who lives in Connecticut who graduated from Boston College about a year ago. And she asks your thoughts on the carbon tax.
Well, I think the big issue here, and this is a little complicated, I think that a lot of the climate thinking, including a lot of that in the Green New Deal, which I strongly favor, but also in Biden's infrastructure plan, a lot of that involves big spending, and it's needed. It's going to have the effect, however, certainly in the near term, of stimulating the growth of the energy industry to produce all the things that need producing, including cement and steel and other things. So unless we're careful, we're going to be trying to ramp down greenhouse gases on the one hand and increasing them on the other. So what's urgent, in my view, is a plan to mandate the reduction of greenhouse gases through some mechanism contemporaneously with this huge investment of good things that we need to be investing in and spending on. So, I never have fallen on my sword for one approach to this versus another. There's a carbon tax idea. Great. Just be sure to set it high enough. And then There's some cap mechanisms where one buys an auction and things, and you can arrange for trading or not. But you could have a cap and dividend program where the resources from the sale of climate auction could be refunded to people on a per capita basis in the country. Or you could simply regulate the reduction of gases per sector. You can get in there and say that the automobile fleet, this is what has to happen, or the transportation fleet. For power plants, this is what has to happen. In the old days, we called that command and control, and I liked it then, and I have no problem with it today, and that seems to be where the Biden administration is heading. Not towards a carbon tax or an energy tax, BTU tax, or whatever, gasoline tax, but towards regulating the reduction of these gases. And that was, we have right now, the legal authority to do that under EPA against Massachusetts case, which basically is a Clean Air Act case. So here we are using this 1972 act to tackle the day's climate issue, which is fine. It's fine until maybe the Supreme Court has a different idea this time. So we just don't know. But for now, that seems to be where things are headed, at least as I read the tea leaves on how the president and Gina McCarthy and John Kerry are going to implement the pledges that they made today.
The next question is somewhat similar. Jamie asks us, what changes in the tax code would be needed to do a better job of true cost accounting that captures the health damages and the natural resources done by runaway business?
Well, the carbon tax would be one. I mean, we should be finding ways to impose costs on environmentally destructive activities, to impose fees on the on the impacts of different pollutants and different situations. My guess is that the solution to these environmental problems, as they have been in the past, would be today. And today is not to rely too much on the tax code to do these things, but to regulate rigorously and prosecute violations. In other words, to use the legal system to do it, and not the Internal Revenue Code. But I do think the changes in the Internal Revenue Code are absolutely essential to deal with the social injustice in the country. I mean, long before we had the Trump tax breaks for the rich and the reduction in the corporate income tax, we had a series of initiatives which shifted the burden of taxes onto off of the very rich, and corporations were escaping taxes long before the rate reduction. So it's there's just a tremendous amount that can be done within the tax code to not only raise needed revenues, but also to provide for a move towards a society where there's a large measure of justice and fairness in income distribution. My personal favorite is to think about incomes in terms of what something like the military or a university has. I mean, except for the athletic director, there's a general sense that everybody in the university system or the military system is going to make a certain amount, and the top people are not going to make too much more certainly not 400 times more than the bottom. Um, but maybe, but anyhow, there's just the tax code is got to be a huge source of gains. There are other things. Our unemployment system in the U.S. is full of holes and limits that many European countries don't have. We have a despicable minimum wage that and other and there are other things involving worker in terms of parental leave and pro-family policies and equity among different categories of workers. All of these things need to be addressed.
So the next question is very theoretical. I'll read it because I want to be sure I capture it. It comes from Sam Bookman, who says, some of your ideas seem to rest on a tension between localization at the community level and centralization at the regulatory level. How do you reconcile this tension?
Well, I don't know that there's a tension there, but it is true that in my own thinking, there are things that can be done best at the local level. And right now, that includes a lot of things that might well be done at the national level at some point. So, I think when California moves to create a program of support for state, for local banks, public banks in the state, that's something that we could have nationally at some point. So I think there are a number of situations where we have opportunities to act locally that one day might become national. And there are other things where, one does believe that we need to be operating nationally right now. A community. Well, I think of little Vermont. We have not much more. We have one congressional representative. Give you a sense of how little we are. And what we do on climate is mostly for our own souls, for our own salvation. It's not going to make much difference in the global sweep of things. But what the United States does makes a huge difference. And so those types of things have got to be dealt with at the national level to a large degree. Now, California is so big that you can imagine it makes a big difference. And there are other states too, and these interstate compacts like the RGGI in the Northeast here are all to the good. But in the end, we need not only national action but international action. And so I don't think it's either or, but I think it's sort of picking our opportunities where they exist and recognizing that there are different things that are best done at the local level and different things that are best done at the national and international levels.
Picking up on that last point, the international, what do you see as the United States' role as a world leader in environmental policy over the next 4 years? Do you think that we'll be able to recapture our past credibility? Do you think the world will follow? How do you think that will shake out? What about China?
Well, I noticed that China was not a member of the new club that was launched today, which is 50% cut of emissions by 2030, and a lot of other, the so-called advanced democracies were, fortunately, members joined up with that. When this all started in the 1970, with its first Earth Day, the U.S. was clearly a leader internationally in environmental action, and really set the pace, and that included on up through issues like protection of the ozone layer, and a lot in between, and we were if not always a perfect model, at least a model of action and movement. Um, I would say that starting, I hate to be not, I'm not being political, but yes, I am. Starting with the Reagan administration, the things we began to slip away from that leadership internationally, and so we've had 40 years where we uh, have had various amounts of U.S. leadership, but never that high point where we were so clearly out front. And other countries have excelled, and I would say, well, in a way, the European Union has taken a lot of leadership during this period. So hopefully, we're in the business of reclaiming that high ground now, not only because it's good for us, but it also is necessary to move other countries. I think it's demonstrable that other countries have slowed up, for example, on their Paris commitments during the Trump years when we were walking away from the whole thing. Uh, so, but the climate issue is a great tragedy, and we are largely heavily responsible for it. Still the largest cumulative emitter over time, and I have a book coming out, in August called "They Knew," uh, and it's about the culpability of the federal government not only in not doing anything really extensive on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but promoting in every administration continued high levels of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. So MIT Press is publishing this analysis of what each administration did from LBJ through Trump. And there have been some high points and low points, but the bottom line is if you look at that whole trajectory of all the administrations, not a one of them has really risen to the climate occasion. And in every case, the federal government did just about everything it could do to lease fossil fuels, to promote development of fracking and alternative fossil fuels, and to authorize through permits a continuation of this gigantic fossil enterprise that we call our energy system. So this is a sad commentary. We have a dog which has contributed.
Offering commentary.
Um, hey, Polly. Thank you. Sorry about that. But so it's a very sad story of the history of federal malfeasance on the climate front. Spanning some 50 years, and but hopefully we're on the cusp of something different and something new now. That seems to me entirely possible, but very difficult to stick with it in our system.
Thank you. And I think we have, as the hour approaches, we have one last question, which is probably a good way to end it. And this is from Anita Riga, who asks, what kinds of academic research have been or would be helpful to catalyze the transitions that you've been talking about?
Well, two things. First, most importantly, one of the themes that our organization, the Next System Project, is pursuing is the idea that we need in our country a new birth of what we would call next system or new system studies. We've seen the growth of gender studies, of Black studies, other areas of new departments, new majors, and we think there's time to begin the process of creating a similar trajectory for new systems studies. I hope that this book that we've done that is, the new systems reader would be helpful in that to those who want to get a quick handle on the issues and begin creating curriculum in this area, curricula in this area, and teaching and researching. There are sort of an endless number of good research questions that need to be addressed, and just as much, there's a lot of academic inquiry and through teaching and discussions that could be brought to this area. So we're very interested in cooperating with anybody in the academy that wants to move in these directions of new system studies, of looking at these questions of system change, and from what are the circumstances that promote system change? What are the critical directions of change? How can they be promoted? What about the role of so-called non-reformist reforms, things that look like mere reform, but it contain the seeds of deep systemic change. To give one easy example, moving away dramatically from GDP to a different set of measures of social and environmental progress would be such a non-reformist reform. So there's a lot to be done in the academy, by the academy, our organization, the Democracy Collaborative, and our project within the Democracy Collaborative, the Next System Project, is really eager to cooperate with people who want to move in these directions. And indeed, we've been working this issue for some weeks now.
And the name of the book again is the New System Reader, correct?
New Systems Reader, yes. Alternatives to a Failed Economy. The same subtitle as this event.
Yes. Gus, thank you so much. We've for the past hour, we've had the privilege of hearing from Gus Speth, the founder of the NRDC, the former head of the Council on Environmental Quality, the former dean of the Yale School of the Environment, a pioneer, a seminal thinker in this area. It's a great way to celebrate Earth Day to have you with us, Gus, and thank you so very much.
Well, thank you, Phil. It's great to be with you, and as I reflect on those positions that you've mentioned, I realize that they've all done better after I left.
Wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Yep, bye now.